What are you saying, people? Hope you're well. Welcome back to the show. Welcome back to Football's 12th Man podcast. I'm your host, Dan Potts, and I thought I'd get my good friend on, Harry Simeon, today to talk all things Arsenal. Harry, weird weekend, man, without sport. Well, I say without sport, without football, it seems. How are you, mate?
Yeah, well, good man. Absolutely, you hit the nail on the head. It's a weird weekend, isn't it? Because obviously, it's off the back of some sad news, which
Mm,
I think a lot of people I think a lot of people understand why football had to be postponed. I don't necessarily think it was the right decision personally. I think it would have been better off letting people go to the games, pay tribute that way. But it kind of is what it is. But yeah, it's been a really weird weekend for me, especially because I was geared up to be working both days. I was supposed to be at a League Two game on Saturday, and then I was supposed to be at the Emirates on Sunday. So, yeah, to sort of plan towards your weekend, knowing that you're working both days, and then to have none of that, it kind of like threw a bit of a spanner in the works, and I haven't really known what to do with myself. How's it been for you?
Yeah, it's a weird one, man. Luckily, I'm a huge Formula One fan and horse racing fan, so I've had a bit of
Mm,
sport, but it's nothing like football, is there? And I think that it's probably my favourite sport to play and to spectate in terms of football. So for me, it's weird when it's not about. I'm not really a massive fan of the international friendlies, Harry. I can't lie, but when it comes to a tournament, I love watching England. But when we've got nothing at all, it's like really, really tough for me. So of course there's the Real Madrid game. And then the other games over in Serie A and La Liga. But I missed the Premier League, man. I can't lie, I missed the Premier League. And there
yeah.
was going to be some good games this weekend, man. It's like Spurs and City, and obviously Arsenal, Everton would have been good. I think Liverpool, Chelsea is in doubt as well because next weekend there's those games that are going ahead. And they're talking about now because of the funeral, it might not happen again, man. I really hope that isn't the case. If I'm honest with you, what's your thoughts on that, and what have you heard, bro?
As far as I'm aware, there's not been a decision taken on next weekend yet. Obviously, you've got, as you said, the funeral coming up, and all the stuff that happens in between that, like now and the funeral as well. Because
Mm.
obviously, unless you've been living under a rock, you'd have seen all the TV pictures. Lots of people going down to Buckingham Palace, etc. So it has put a bit of a strain, hasn't it, on police services and things like that. As far as I know, the European games are going to go ahead. I think there may be a few late changes, i.e., we've seen Rangers' game at home to Napoli being moved, I think, from the Tuesday to the Wednesday already to help them sort of deal with the challenges that they're facing up there in Glasgow from a policing standpoint. So I think we might get some changes. But from what I've heard, from what I've been told, the UEFA are pushing really, really hard to ensure there is as little disruption as possible. They're open to
Mm.
moving things around, but they don't want games postponed because when are they going to be played, Dan? We're talking about this World Cup, and the games that we've had postponed this weekend are probably not going to be played until January now, which gives you an idea how jam-packed the schedule is between now and the World Cup. So yeah, it's any other year, maybe this wouldn't be as much of an issue. And maybe if there wasn't so much of a scheduling problem, people wouldn't have been, I don't want to say angry, but maybe not as concerned by the postponements this weekend. Maybe people would have just gone, all right, fair enough. But I think that concern around when we're going to make these games up has fueled some of the kind of the pushback against it.
Yeah, and I think I've accepted, and I think the top six teams have to accept that we're going to be playing 2 to 3 games a week now up
Mm,
until the World Cup, and probably if things go wrong, then for the rest of the season, depending on how far we get in competition. So I think it leads nicely on to what we're going to discuss today, which is it seems what everyone's talking about at the moment when it comes to Arsenal is this squad big enough? Is it too thin? Is it strong? Do we have cover and strength in depth? I think it's fair to say, Harry, that now that we've seen a few transfer windows gone by, the squad has got stronger and stronger, but I think it shows you how weak it was before because there's still some gaps, in my opinion. And I've really felt like I've spoken to you for a long time, it seems, on these shows because you and I have both been busy doing other things. And it's weird, isn't it, that we went from speaking basically every Monday evening to now hardly speaking at all. But
My wife says
aside
that
from
to
that,
me every day.
mate, is that what our relationships come to? um, I feel personally like there's difference of opinion with me and you on a lot of things. I'm not really sure, however, what your opinion is on this one in terms of the transfer window and what you think this squad's capable of doing in terms of its size. And I think now we've got to be realistic about a World Cup year 5 subs being used, which I think is going to be a massive part to play as well with having a strong squad. And also the fact that we're back in 4 competitions. We've said already that 2 or 3 games a week with all these fixtures that have to be rescheduled now, potentially 2 more in Everton and Brentford for us. It means that we're going to have Spurs and Liverpool next. It's going to get tougher for us. And I just worry looking at the bench on Thursday night with 3 people that I don't think I've ever heard of. Well, 2 of them certainly. I haven't heard of Matt Smith. I haven't heard of Kozia Dewberry. And I don't know who the other guy was. It was a double-barreled name beginning with C. So I'm sitting there thinking we're 6 games in and we're looking quite thin in certain parts of the squad. So I want to get your overall on that, and then we'll go a little bit into some of the positions that we might be looking at. I don't want to say weak, but I want to say that question marks over. Let's
Need
leave it.
work, yeah, for sure. No, I think you're right. I think there are positions that we need further work on. There are places where we lose 1 player, 2 players, and we've got a bit of an issue. But I think look, whenever I say anything about Mikel Arteta or his approach, the first thing that I get rammed down my throat is, you're just defending Arteta, you're just backing the club, whatever. and I'm not doing this here. I genuinely do think and do believe that Mikel Arteta prefers a streamlined group of players who are able to play in a multitude of positions than having an over-bloated squad. I think when he came to Arsenal, we had an over-bloated squad. We had players who were walking around the training ground on a daily basis who were playing no part of the weekends. That was having a negative impact on the culture within the club, something that he's worked very hard to try and turn around. And I think that it's deliberate that the numbers are low. Now, I'm not saying that you want it threadbare. I'm not saying that you want it to the point where 1 injury can completely derail you. But I think that it's a very deliberate thing that he would rather have a smaller group of players who can play in a multitude of positions in order to try and progress that way. So you look at what we've got now, right? You look at centre-backs. Let's take centre-back as a prime example here, because I think this is a good example. You've got Saliba, you've got Gabriel, you've got White. You've got question marks over Rob Holding. Is he good enough? I don't know. But within that defensive unit, you've got Kieran Tierney now, who could potentially tuck in at centre-back if you really needed him to because of Zinchenko's arrival. You've got Tomiyasu, who, although he's only ever played at right-back for Arsenal, was a centre-back prior to joining the club. And so there is more depth in that centre-back position than you initially think when you just look at the numbers. And this is where I'm trying to go. Like, he knows that by having players who can play in a number of areas, he can often cover problem positions with people who are just as capable, or who are capable enough at least to get you through. I think there's a couple of positions in the team where we don't have that. For example, centre forward. Okay, if we lose Gabriel Jesus, the drop off between him and Eddie is significant. And if we lose Eddie, well, we're completely up shit street in that position, in my opinion. So there are areas where he still needs to add more. But there are also areas that maybe on the eye, they look a little bit thin. But in his mind, given the versatility of some of the players that he's brought in over the last couple of seasons, he probably will feel that we've got better cover there than maybe we as fans do. He sees them on the training ground. He knows what they can do. He knows whether they can tuck into certain areas, certain positions. And, this question has really been sort of propped up again by the fact that we've got some injuries in midfield in particular. That's where it's all stemming from ultimately. But I mean, I would ask the question back to you. How much depth can you possibly have in one midfield position? Because we're in a place now today where we've got no Partey and no El Neni. Okay, that's 2 options there gone. Zinchenko could play there, couldn't he? Lokonga is playing there now. How many more can you put into the mix without then going down that route of, we're over bloated and we're going to have players that are just not part of the setup and part of the team. So I think he's been really unlucky in midfield in that Mohamed El Neni, Mr. Reliable, normally has gone down with a long-term injury. But the only question mark for me, and the thing that I would direct at Mikel Arteta if I had the opportunity to speak to him would be, but shouldn't you have known this about Thomas Partey? Because it keeps happening. So I don't know. I don't really feel right now that we're in a place where we've got a shit ton of problems. I just think that we can kind of see it coming a little bit. and we're right to be concerned by it. But I think the majority of our, let's call it, anxiety around this subject stems from how we fell apart at the end of last season. Maybe, I don't know if you agree.
I agree with the last bit because I think when we say, well, we're a little bit worried, the reason we're a little bit worried is because we've seen this, haven't we? We saw it last season where we had Cedrics and Holdings and Nketiahs and El Nenis, and on the bench there was no cover for them because of the amount of injuries that we had. And I think my biggest frustration, Harry, is the fact that in January we did nothing to replace our fullbacks or our defensive midfield, and we didn't even replace Aubameyang. And then we've gone into the summer really good with Zinchenko and Jesus, having Saliba back. And then we've got Marquinhos and Vieira, who, to be fair, I don't know much about, but from what I've seen from the early signs, could be good players to have in the squad. But then I feel personally like if we're going to spend 40 million euros on Fabio Vieira, did we need to potentially spend that amount of money in the area of centre midfield? I would probably question that we didn't need an attacking midfielder in order of priority over one that can be an upgrade or a backup to Xhaka or a backup to Thomas Partey. And I think that's my biggest frustration, that I thought you're willing to spend that much on a left back, good, because we need one. You're willing to spend that much on a centre forward, good, we need one. But you're willing to spend what on the centre midfield? And the answer was not much, because Zinchenko can play there if Xhaka gets injured. Or what happens when Partey gets injured? Will we play El Neni? Well, last season that wasn't good enough. And Lokonga, for me, isn't a defensive midfielder from what I can see. I don't know what your thoughts are on that. We'll come back to that. But I personally feel like we're short massively in midfield. And we're relying on our good friend Granit Xhaka, Harry, at the moment, who, by the way, you'll be surprised to know, I think has been really good. I think consistency has been one of our biggest issues. Yeah, where's mine? I've got mine somewhere as well.
Always got it to
There it
hand.
is.
Every time I do a
Yeah,
podcast with you, I've got to make sure it's
there
in
it
front
is.
of me.
There it is, man. I think he's been fantastic, mate. He really has. And you know, I wanted to come into like some individuals in a bit, and I do want to come back to him. But I think where I am in terms of your question is where I disagree is that. So what I agree with you is that yeah, Arteta, how is he not think? Oh my God, Partey's injured. Well, this happens all the time. Where I disagree is that we've been unlucky because I do think we're short there. So I do think the two injuries, of course, you could probably say is a bit unlucky, but it's not a shock to me because this has happened before with Thomas Partey. So that's
Agree,
where I
but
kind of disagree. Go
yeah,
on.
and I agree with that. And I said it myself on Thomas Partey. The thing with El Neni though is like, if El Neni was injured for 2 weeks, this wouldn't even be a discussion. Like we'd be like, okay, we get by for 2 weeks without him. But because it's a long-term injury, it's sort of triggered the alarm bells, hasn't it, around what we're going to do. Now, the other point to make about midfield as well is I think we break it down in a really different way to Mikel Arteta in the way that we look at it. So we look at this midfield as having one DM and two eights, right? Correct me if I'm wrong. That's what
Yeah. That's
people
what
would
I
see.
see it as. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's what I see it as well. But in Mikel Arteta's mind, I don't think he sees it quite as black and white as that. I think he sees it as not. I don't think he sees anyone as a DM. I think he sees them as the deepest lying playmaker. And the reason I say that is because we've noticeably played with a higher line this season, and having Saliba in the group has allowed us to do that. Now we've squeezed right up to the halfway line, and the distance now between the DM and the two centre backs is minimal. The distance between the fullbacks and the DM is minimal because both of them now are being asked to tuck in, right? So whoever it is that plays in that position at the top of their list right now is not, in terms of Arteta's priorities around what that player needs to be able to do. It's not needs to be able to break up play. It's needs to be able to progress the ball for us, because we're hoping to hunt in a pack in and around that area and win the ball back that way. And in an ideal world, we'd be winning the ball back higher up the pitch because of the aggression with which we're pressing. So the idea of a traditional DM, I don't think is one that Mikel Arteta is looking at. And if you think about it, Thomas Partey is not really that either, is he? He's someone that likes to get on the ball, break lines, etc., etc. So I think as a consequence of that, he thinks that if Partey's not available, Lokonga can be that playmaker. El Neni can be that playmaker, maybe to a lesser degree. I don't think he's that good at breaking lines. But he probably thinks then Zinchenko could do it. Xhaka could do it. Maybe Xhaka wouldn't be as exposed in this current setup as he was when he played DM previously for Arsenal. And I think as a consequence of the team evolving, the role that he's looking at that player uptaking is different. And that's led to him thinking that maybe we don't need to go out and buy one. Now, I'm not saying it's right. Let me just put that out there. I'm not saying that that's the right approach. I'm trying to read between the lines and understand how he's looking at it. And I do think the role of whoever plays in that position is very different to what it was 12, 18 months ago because of the other components, the fullback's new positioning, which is before it was inverted on the right and you had Tierney going out on the left, wasn't it? Going on the
Mm,
outside when he was fit. Since
mm,
Zinchenko's come in, you've now got both of them playing in an inverted role. Ben White is stepping in field, but so is Zinchenko. So those two become essentially part of a three-man midfield, really, when we have the ball.
mm.
And so the whole setup is different. And so what you need from those players then slightly changes. And that's where I think that we as fans profile players in a way that is slightly different from Mikel Arteta. And so what's at the top of our priority list maybe isn't at the top of his.
Listen, something I agree with you. There's a couple of things I disagreed with you, I said, but actually a lot of it I agreed with you. The one thing I agree with you that you said right from the off, which I'm worried about, which I think is true, by the way, and I think you are right, but it worries me. Mikel Arteta wants a small squad. That worries me. The thing that we might get away with it is the bit on the end that you said. Wants a small squad that's versatile. Now, the versatility thing is cool, but my biggest concern or qualm with that is sometimes when players can do a job there, that gets you through games against Villa or Everton. When there's a player that can do a job and we've got to play Spurs, Liverpool, and Man United in a row, I'm going to be a little bit worried because that's going to be a difficult period of time to play. And I think although it's good to have people that can cover in certain games and do jobs, I'd rather just have two players in each position that can actually play there. And I know that's not always ideal, but I feel now 6 transfer windows in, we should be in a position where we've got at least 2 players for each that actually do play there in their natural position. Now, I'm all for Ben White coming and covering the right back when they're both out. I'm all for, having somebody like Rob Holding having to come in if Gabriel and Ben White are both out. But having someone there who just plays there, and we don't need anybody else to come in, that worries me a bit. So I'll give you an example. Let's just pick right back, for example. Yeah, we've got Tomiyasu, who I think is great. Really like him. Think he's a really good disciplined right back, and one that we've probably not had for many years, in my opinion. We've always had the right back that goes bombing forward. Now we've also got that in Cedric, but I don't believe he's good enough. But when that doesn't happen at the moment, he's looking at Ben White, who can play out there. If we just had 2 right backs, I mean, at the moment, you can say Cedric is a right back in defence to him, but I just don't think he's good enough. If we was to go and buy another right back, let's say, that is a little bit more overlapping or attacking. Let's just say Tariq Lamptey. That's just one I can think of, right? We've got Lamptey and Tomiyasu that both do different jobs, but can both play at right back. And if they both get injured, then you've got Ben White who can come over there as well. At the moment, we've just said we don't need to go and sign another right back at the moment because it's not a priority because Ben White can play there. And I would rather be getting towards the stage now, 6 transfer windows in, of having, do you know what? We've now got pretty much 2 positions covered that are natural. And that's my biggest worry, Harry, is that because this squad is so small, we might have, he's supposed to be our cover for right back, but he's currently in his normal position at the moment because so-and-so is injured. Where I think we need to be looking at is, well, we've actually got 3 positions here now covered because one of them can cover the right back if both of them are injured. And that's just me using the right back as an example, by the way. I feel we need that across the pitch. But I do think we're short in a couple of positions, and it worries me about this small squad. Now, Pep Guardiola, everyone will say, Manchester City have a small squad. Manchester City have a small squad. The difference is the drop-off in quality is there, not here. And Arsenal's is there. So when Partey's injured and we got Lokonga, it's different from when Rodri's injured and they got Calvin Phillips. When Jack Grealish has to come in for Mahrez, there's not a huge drop-off. So I understand the small squad thing, and I don't think it's a huge problem. I think the small squad of the drop-off in the quality that we've got is going to be a big issue for me. So I didn't know if you got any thoughts on that, bro.
Yeah, certainly you want as little drop off as you can possibly have. And that's been one of my issues. Like Thomas Partey is the one I'll always use as an example. Anything that we have alternatively to him is nowhere near the same level. I think we can all agree on that. I think we all know that. The problem is, how do you get to that point? How do you get to that point where you have that group of players, that slimline, streamlined group of players who are all engaged, all wanting to be there, all bought into the ideology, all bought into the system, but all of the same quality? The only way you get there is over a period of time, and it's by going out and spending big bucks on the best players. Manchester City are able to do that. And they've done it, for a number of years now, and that's why they are where they are. Pep Guardiola is a fantastic coach as well, which obviously plays a big part. But I think with Arsenal, there was so much to do when Mikel Arteta came in that, given the way the club operates, it was always going to take time to get there. So this summer, we spent, again, quite a bit of money, and we brought in very little in terms of sales. In terms of money coming in for letting players go, we got very little coming again. That's been how many windows now, Dan? 3, 4, maybe, where we've hardly brought in a penny. We've managed to get people off the wage bill, and obviously that makes a big difference too. But in terms of actually bringing in money, we haven't done it. And so for a group
What
of
do you put that
fans,
down to, though, Harry? Is that like previous regime problems? Is that like both,
bit of
like
both,
Edu and
bit of both.
yeah,
It's mainly a previous regime problem, because if those players were any good, people would want them and you'd be able to sell them.
agreed.
Okay, so that's the main point. But aside from that, I think when you as a football club take that decision and that stance, which we had to, by the way, to kind of push people aside and say, you're not good enough, you're not in the squad, you're going to go out on loan. The message that you send to everybody else is, this guy ain't important to us. And then you get into a situation like we did this summer with, prime example, Lucas Torreira. We've sent him out on loan how many times now?
Yeah.
And then you're sitting there in the transfer window trying to demand top dollar for him. Nobody's going to pay it. They all know that you want to get rid of him. They all know that you're desperate to do that. So they're going to wait till the end of the window, and they're going to make shitty offers until you eventually go, look, I just need to resolve this. I'll let it happen. Happened with Hector Bellerin as well. Okay, everybody and their dog knew that we didn't want him necessarily, and he didn't want to be at Arsenal. And so we had to get right to the end of the window before everyone just went, well, if we don't do this now, it's not going to happen before the window slammed shut. Contract terminated. See you later. Off he went to Barcelona. So that's where I think we're a little bit responsible nowadays for that. But ultimately, the crux of those issues is from a previous time. And, we've moaned a lot about KSE over the years. Let's not pretend that overnight they've all had a personality transplant and decided that they're going to change the way that they run the football club. They're spending money now, but that will mean that the money, in terms of what we're spending, at some point it's going to drop off. It's not going to stay 150, 200 million every summer. They will feel that they've done all the heavy lifting now. And I think you'll see them be more cautious. Not that they won't spend at all, but you'll see them go after one or two high-profile players each season rather than looking to bring in 4s and 5s. And that's naturally how it should be, right? If the main part of the squad is built, then you don't need to add 4 and 5 every summer. And so naturally, you're going to drop off a little bit in what you do. But there will come a point, and it's why Arsenal have been careful to recruit players of certain ages. They've wanted to tie people down on contracts. They're looking to future-proof this squad so that 2-3 years down the line, we can sell some of these players on if we need to rebuild in other areas, and keep doing that and actually make sure that they're not in a position again where there is no money coming in and it's pure outlay. And that's part of the process, if you like. It's about future-proofing the team as well as making it competitive today. And it's a really tough balance to find, I think.
Yeah, I think you make some good points there, and I think you're right about the ownership. I don't see anything changing there. I've said that from the start, and this season I'll be putting a lot of pressure on them if things don't go right, man. But before we start getting into individuals, I want to look at the team as a whole as to where we are with this squad, not just this first 11. Because I think you agree with me, Harry. This first team is decent, mate. I like the first team. I think we've got an 11 players there that I think are good. I think there's potential to upgrade it still, if I'm honest. But I do think the first 11 is good. I think the squad is where we might get some problems, and we saw last season that we had some problems. So I want to whack this up because I think it's important to go through it and see whereabouts we've, I think, got stronger and not weaker, but still needing some kind of work done. That might be hard for me and you to see, but hopefully everyone can see that on the screen. I think personally, mate, going through the areas of the squad, man, it's interesting for me to see where we're stronger, but I think it's clear to see where we're either weaker or still lacking strength in depth. And I think the obvious areas for me, I've gone through on other previous shows. So I want to let you kind of run through where you think personally we're still kind of weak, but also more importantly, where you think we might be stronger. Because I think that is the case in some positions within our side, mate. So what's your thoughts on this kind of 15 to 20 players that we have?
I think the back line is stronger in that we now have a Zinchenko there who can provide cover for Tierney, which we didn't have before. We've got Saliba there, who's another player that can play to the same level as White and Gabriel did for the majority of last season. And then, of course, the fact that you've got White who can play at right back as well. So you don't really need to turn to Cedric in the event that Tomiyasu picks up an injury. You don't need to turn to Rob Holding in the event that Gabriel picks up an injury, because you can shift it all around. I think the back line is in the place where Mikel Arteta probably wants it now. I think in an ideal world, he'd prefer a better centre-half than Rob Holding to be the fourth in line. But how easy is it to get players in on the basis that they're going to be the fourth in line? So I think the back line generally is better. I don't know about the goalkeeping position. I don't know about Turner. Not 100%.
I think it's weaker, man. That
Yeah.
Turner, I'm sorry, man. I've seen enough to know that I've got some concerns. I mean, we had Runnison in goal not long ago, and I don't think he looks much different to him, if I'm honest, apart from stature. That's about the only thing that looks different. He looks a flapper. I don't think he looks confident, and I'm worried, man. Pre-season and that game the other night hasn't done enough to convince me, Harry.
Yeah, he's not someone I'm really confident of. And I did a show on my channel sort of asking why he was the one that we went for in terms of as a backup goalkeeper. And I got a bit of stick for that. But as I said on there, it wasn't personal. I've not seen anything to suggest that it was the right move. So the goalkeeping position worries me a little bit, because we're one injury away from a catastrophe, I think, there. In midfield, I think the Partey position, it's really unfortunate that El Neni's out. Lokonga can play that role now, I believe, in this new shape system, whatever you want to call it.
Do you think? You think he can
I
go
do.
defensive?
I don't think it is as defensive as people make it out to be. That's kind of the point I was trying to make earlier. I feel like the centre backs get closer, the full backs tuck in, and I don't think you're left to cover this big area of space in midfield by yourself like you
I
once
get that,
were.
Harry, but I think what I'm getting at is because obviously I agreed with the points you made earlier, to be fair, but I feel like off the ball, there's some issues with Lokonga. On the football, I think he's actually quite good. I quite like him on the football. I think he looks to progress passes. I think he's always looking for that ball forward. I think when he sits in that anchor on the ball, it looks good. But off the ball is quite poor, right? 0 tackles at Old Trafford, like 0. Come on, man. Like I need to see better than that. So I've got
Yeah,
some
I
issues
think
with him.
I wouldn't even say that for me the issues are off the ball. I would say it's concentration issues. That's what I would put it down to. Just a couple of times at Old Trafford where he just switched off, maybe didn't track a run from midfield,
Mm.
maybe didn't cover a space, gave a ball away cheaply as well in the build up to one of the goals. That kind of thing it's a lack of concentration, maybe a lack of experience as well. But I think overall, in terms of, look, we went to Old Trafford and we played them off the park. We
Mm.
completely dominated them. And that was with him playing in that role. So barring a couple of moments, which obviously proved key in the end, and so it's easy to kind of, to sort of try and wipe them out. But ultimately, those two moments, and I don't even think they were both his, I don't think more than one of the goals was his fault. I thought one was. But you take that away and he's actually done all right and we've dominated the game. So Mikel Arteta is looking for the system to win, not individual players. It's his way of playing that he believes should be something that anybody in that squad can come into, take on a role because they all understand it, they all work on it every day, and then they should be able to impose themselves as a football team on that basis. But ultimately, when you've got different players, they've got different strengths and weaknesses. And maybe Thomas Partey would have showed some experience, maybe not played a pass in a dangerous area, maybe made a tactical foul when necessary that maybe Sambi Lokonga just hasn't got. But what I'm trying to say is Lokonga for me in this current iteration is the third choice there behind
Mm.
Partey and El Neni. And we're just unlucky at the moment that we've had to turn to the third choice. And if you become obsessed with your third choice all the time, then do you actually ever get anywhere? Because most of the time they're not going to play. And
Mm.
you end up doing what we did before and bringing in a shit ton of players who are all of a similar level, but no real stars, no outstanding players. And for me, it's quality over quantity. And I used this example on my show earlier, Dan. Liverpool in that season when they lost Van Dijk, nobody went into that season and talked about what a lack of quality they had in that squad or how
Yeah.
small the squad was or a lack of depth. But it just goes to show that when a
Look at them
player is,
now.
yeah, but it goes to show as well, when a player is that good, it don't matter how good your squad is. If they're missing, it makes a difference. Good players are indispensable to teams. And if you obsess too much about having the third and fourth option and fifth option, then I think you then compromise on the quality in the first and second choices, who most of the time are going to be the ones that you actually use.
Listen, I think again you make some good points. I feel there's a lot there I agree with. I think the Lokonga one, me and you will probably disagree on. I feel like there's a lot more that I think that position may need. However, I don't think it's Lokonga's fault. I just don't think he is that kind of anchor in
Mm.
midfield. From what I've seen, and certainly in pre-season, he was playing at the left 8 role. So I think that's potentially where his position is. But let's look at some, just lastly, before we kind of wrap up, because I want to get your quick opinions as well of where things are going. Because believe it or not, we're top of the league, mate, and it's actually going quite well. But you wouldn't believe it the way people have been speaking, and maybe I'm guilty of that sometimes as well. I want to bring this one up, though, because I think it's got to be said when me and you are together. Chaitanya, thanks again, mate, for your super chat. Absolute legend. Says, lads, thoughts on Granit Xhaka? He's a very fit guy, but I feel he's been overused by Arteta. Marquinhos did back Saka up, but who do we have for Xhaka? This is an interesting one because we spent most of the stream talking about Thomas Partey and the lack of defensive midfield, but can Zinchenko cover Xhaka in your opinion? Is that kind of the backup to Granit Xhaka in your opinion, or have we not got one that can do what Xhaka does?
It's really hard to answer that, because I think the idea when we signed Zinchenko was go out and get someone who can play in midfield but can also cover Kieran Tierney because of his constant injury problems. I genuinely think the reason they went for Zinchenko over most other options was because he ticked multiple boxes, and it plays into what we were talking about earlier around wanting versatile people, and then as a result of that being able to streamline the numbers down. But I think Mikel Arteta has seen that when Zinchenko plays at left back and steps into the midfield, we are so much more dominant in terms of the way we control the game, dictate the game. That's not to say Kieran Tierney's a bad player, right? Because he isn't. He's a very good left back. But I've seen him in a couple of games this season try to step inside, try to be that guy that does the Zinchenko thing, and he looks lost, man. He doesn't do it to the same level.
Oh, lost Harry. He's obviously lost his Wi-Fi or his connection somehow. I happen to agree with what he's saying in relation to Zinchenko, I must admit. I do. I do feel, however, that Kieran Tierney sometimes we've forgotten what he's good at and what he does do. And I think sometimes because it's different, people now look at Zinchenko and think that Zinchenko is all of a sudden the guy that we now have to play 100%. So I do get what Harry's saying there. I just feel personally like with Zinchenko and Tierney, I don't think there's that much of a drop off. And I do look at the position of Zinchenko sometimes off the ball and do get concerned. But I'm going to bring Harry back in because he's here
Sorry,
now.
man. I don't know what happened there. It just closed. Yeah, as I was saying, I just think that, yeah, I just caught the end of what you were saying there. I just think that Zinchenko gives us more control in the overall game. And maybe where the idea was to bring him in and give him a little bit more of sort of game time in the midfield as well, that Mikel Arteta thinks, well, Xhaka's playing well, and we're much more controlling when Zinchenko's in there as well. So why would I change this at this moment in time? But we've got those options. And you mentioned yourself, Lokonga can probably play that 8 role. I think in the long run, the idea is for Fabio Vieira to be one of those 8s as well.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay.
You know, I think that's where he's been signed to play. But I think it's going to be a bit of time before we see that. You know, get him used to the Premier League.
Do you think like you'll see a Rodri, Kevin De Bruyne and Bernardo Silva type thing with Partey, Odegaard and Vieira?
Yeah, I think you could see that. I think that's an option. I think Xhaka gives you a bit more steel in there, certainly than Fabio Vieira does.
Yeah, he looks lightweight, don't he, Vieira?
Yeah. He looks like you could blow him over. But
yeah,
I think that is an option. I actually think as well that if he could stay fit, Emile Smith-Rowe could be one of those 8s as well, in maybe Mikel Arteta's mind again, because as I say, the roles are different now. The role of Granit Xhaka now is to get forward very often, to be involved in that build-up play. And we all know Smith-Rowe technically is a much better player. So, you know, you try and think about it and you think, yeah, maybe we've just got it. We're not quite in sync with the way Arteta profiles these players. And maybe that's why he feels that the squad is better than maybe we do. Although, having said that, to be fair to him, he did say that we were lacking a bit, didn't he? Towards the end of the window, he did make that comment, which suggests he's not totally 100% satisfied. But equally, the window's shut now. He's not going to sit there every week banging on about the squad.
No,
he's going to
we
say,
can't, because that's going to frustrate
you can't.
people. You know?
Yeah, you can't. You know, you got to get on with it now. You've got what you've got. That's your your hand, work with it. And yeah, so
I mean, do you think we'll do something in January, Harry? I think we might have to this time. I mean, depending on injuries, of course, but
I think it depends on where we are. It depends on what the squad looks like in terms of injuries. But there's a part of me that does get frustrated, but there's also a part of me that is actually quite happy not to see Arsenal panicking at every opportunity and recruiting the wrong people, man. Because it's ultimately why we are where we are today. Because we
yeah,
bought
and I get
so
that.
much shit for big money.
I get that, but at the same time, my kind of throwback to that is what's happened for us to be in a position to panic. That's my biggest qualm, is that you've had a long time. We shouldn't ever be panicking at this stage, particularly when you've done nothing in January. In my opinion, Edu's job is to then look from that February period to say, right, what is going to happen in this summer? Things can change, but I need to have a plan of where we're going. And sometimes it seems that when you're putting in a bid with 40 minutes to go of Douglas Luiz, that plan's gone wrong. So I understand that, and then he got injured long term and we didn't see that coming. But at the same time, it's kind of embarrassing when we've got 40 minutes left of the window and we're chucking in bids of 25 million for a player that apparently we didn't even want before El Neni was injured. So I think sometimes we need to look at it and think, where are we going with that one? So, I mean, that might open up a new convo. So I don't want to go too far into that, but
No,
that's my only biggest concern, really. Go on.
just quickly on that. Like, we weren't willing to pay anywhere near what Villa wanted for Douglas Luiz.
Yeah,
That
that's
was
fair.
less. They wanted about 40 million, and I think the highest bid that we went up to was about, from what I was told, was about 22 plus 3, so about 25 in total. So Arsenal clearly have an idea in their own minds of what players are worth now, and are willing to push that boundary a little bit if they feel it's worthwhile, but will not be at the mercy of some of these football clubs like we had been in the past. And
Mm.
and I think that in the long run that will serve us well. I mean, prime example, last January, why haven't we gone and got Dusan Vlahovic? Why haven't we got Dusan Vlahovic? Watch Dusan Vlahovic this season. In fact, that Juventus are playing in an hour's time. Scored a few goals this season, but his overall game and overall performances have led to a lot of criticism in Italy, because people are looking at this guy and going, and I'm not saying he's a bad player. I think he's a good
No,
player.
no.
I think that Max Allegri is a problem for him. I really do. I don't think the two
Okay.
are compatible. But
Wonder if we'll go in for him again then.
what I'm trying to say is that there's no guarantee that if we had gone and done that deal, that it would have been the difference. Like, it's very easy with hindsight to always say that, but sometimes things don't work out. And I think as a football club in our position, where we're trying to compete with the Cities and the Chelseas, but we don't have the resource of the Cities and the Chelseas, it becomes even more imperative that our recruitment is as close to perfect as it possibly can be. You'll never get everything 100%, but Liverpool's recruitment over the years has been so good for the most part, barring a few anomalies, that they've been able to maintain those levels. But that can't last forever. I've said this 1,000,001 times. Jurgen Klopp will probably leave England with one Premier League title. And that doesn't reflect what a great manager he is and what a great job he's done at that football club. But the fact is that you have to be perfect pretty much. And so if going and doing those deals that we're not entirely sure about, or we think are putting us in a position where we're a little bit uncomfortable financially, is if we think that we shouldn't do that because of the knock-on effect of that, because of what we've learned from the past, then it will frustrate. But I can see where they're coming from, I guess.
Listen, I want to do two things before we do wrap up, man. I want to
Yeah,
talk
go
about
ahead.
that centre forward position, and then what I want to talk about is our expectations. And to be fair, Patrick Roberts has kind of summed up what I believe that we're potentially lacking, which is that aerial threat, tall, physical centre forward. Now, I think Gabriel Jesus and Eddie have proved that actually, although they're not the tallest, they're quite good at times in the air. We've seen them score headers before for Man City and for Arsenal. We've also seen them hold the ball up. And I think Eddie Nketiah, as much as I'm not a huge fan and think that he's going to be this wonderful striker for us, I do see some progression and some development in the last few months in terms of his strength. I think his off the ball stuff is a lot better. I think his creativity is getting better. I'd like to see him score more goals, but at the same time, who am I to say that when 15 minutes he comes on, he's supposed to score every time? At the same time, though, I do think that he needs to, ensure that we are not asking those questions. When it comes to Gabriel Jesus, mate, I think we've got an absolute talent on our hands here. I think he's been a menace and he's been superb. But when he gets injured, I do have a worry that we don't have a target man or a threat in the box. Now, I wanted to get your thoughts on that and where you think there could be solutions to overcome that, mate.
It's hard, isn't it? It's really hard because if we were to lose Gabriel Jesus and Eddie Nketiah, I guess the next in line for me would probably be Gabriel Martinelli. But then you lose something from the left-hand side, don't you? But I guess it comes back to what I was talking about earlier on, that the system for Mikel Arteta is the number one. And then it's about the individuals. And if you actually look at Gabriel Jesus's heat maps and you sort of study his patterns of play, he does drift left and right quite a bit, which suggests that you don't need to be an out and out box, penalty box centre forward to replace him if he was to come into the team. What he does is he goes left, he goes right, he drops deep. He dropped really deep a few times, didn't he? At Old Trafford recently as well. So again, it's about the system. It's about finding someone that can do those things. But I guess the point you're coming at it from, and I agree with, is we need an alternative to that. What about when that's not working? What about when we do need to be a bit more direct? What about when the only space we can find is in the wide areas and we need someone in the middle to occupy centre halves, offer an aerial threat? We don't have that at the football club at the moment. But this is where we're at now. We're still trying to build that strong side that plays a certain way and that will the most of the time get you over the line. But there will come a point where we need to vary up, like Manchester City have just done. False nines. What, 2-3 seasons of false nines? And they've come to the point where they've gone, you know what, there's a top centre forward available here, and this gives us another dimension, and they've gone and done it. Liverpool, same. Firmino, false nine. Sometimes Mane was playing there towards the back end of his time there. But then they've gone and got Darwin Nunez, which is different, which is an alternative. It's just the next stage of your evolution is that you need to then have different styles and different solutions for different problems. I just don't think we're there yet. I think right now I'm happy to have a plan A and two players that I think can carry out that plan A at the moment in Jesus and Nketiah, because work rate wise, Nketiah will put it in as well. But we do, maybe in the next summer, you look at bringing in a different type of striker, but I don't think that was at the top of my list this summer. And it goes back to what I was saying again. You can't do everything at once because the money's just not there. So you got to prioritize, pick and choose what you think is most important. And they've obviously decided that isn't.
Yeah, and I actually think priority for me is somebody who can come in, replace Partey and replace Chaka. That's what I think is the priority at the moment. Now, don't get me wrong. If somebody said you could have Tariq Lamptey as your backup right back, you could have Neto on your wing, and you could have Tammy Abraham up front, I'm not going to say I don't want them players. But what I will say is that I think the priority at the moment is that midfield, because it still, for me, is looking like it's going to be a potential problem. Harry, I want to come to kind of expectations, bro, because I feel like, this is a good comment here from Super Tommy Tuchel. That's good timing, isn't it? It says, even as a Chelsea fan, I love your channel, Dan. Thank you, bro. Keep up your good work. It says, a question for you all. Do you think Arteta survives another season without top four this time? Cheers. That's coming from a Chelsea fan. I think it's interesting, Harry, isn't it? Because, of course, we've got different ways now of where we can get into this Champions League. And that, for me, is the target of Arsenal this year. I don't think the target's to go for a title. I don't think the target's to try and get top six. I think the target is to get Champions League football. And there's two routes that we can do that now, by winning the Europa League or by getting top four. If that happens, I think that he will be safe. If that doesn't happen, I think that there'll probably be questions about his future. Now, I would like to see him go if that doesn't happen, because I just don't think we can carry on and go another season without Champions League football after we spent so much money and given him so much time. But I do feel that Stan Kroenke, as long as we get into Europe, will keep him. So I'm going to be looking at the ownership as opposed to what the manager's doing this season, whatever. Yeah. So where do you stand on this expectations for Arsenal, and what happens if it does go wrong for you, mate?
So, yeah, I totally agree. Expectation has to be to get back in the Champions League. And yes, people will say it's difficult this season because you've got to play games every 3 days. But ultimately, the upside to that is that you've got another route in, as you say. So, you got to take the rough with the smooth. Champions League qualification is an absolute must. He's been backed not just with money spent in bringing new players in, but he's been backed by being able to kick people out that would have cost the club money to do that. The Aubameyangs, the Ozils, all of those deals, letting people go out on loan while we're paying their wages, all of that nonsense to make sure that he has the group that he wants and he gets rid of the disruptive influences. That didn't come from KSE. They're not on the training pitch. They don't buy into that stuff. They don't care about that stuff. They wouldn't have a clue about it. That's all from Mikel Arteta. So You got to, if you've given him that support, he has to deliver. And he's taken some big decisions. Some of them have paid off. Others are still questionable. Others they're still, the jury's out on, etc., etc. But yeah, if he doesn't make Champions League, then you've got to ask the questions. But as I said to you last season as well, because I think we had a similar conversation at some point last season as well, you've got to look at the circumstances around why that is as well, because football isn't just that black and white. As a football club, if you feel someone's done everything within their power, but outside influences, outside reasons have cost you, then...
So give me an example then. Give me an example.
All right, so I'll give you an example. Last season, I thought that we should have qualified for the Champions League. I said that it was overachieving based on what I expected at that time to be even in the race going into the final weeks. But I genuinely believe that last season, the reason we didn't get into the Champions League was because of the injuries that we had at the back end of the season. I think that was the decisive point. I don't think it was Mikel Arteta. I don't think it was even some of the players. I think they all played a small part. But for me, the main reason was we didn't just lose our midfield in Thomas Partey for long periods. We lost both our fullbacks at key times. And the drop-off, which we were talking about earlier, between Tomiyasu and Cedric and Tierney and, whatever else nonsense we were doing at left back to get through was a problem. It was a big problem. If, for example, right, we get to, I don't know, we get to May and, we narrowly lose a game that sets us back and we've got injury problems, etc., etc., you then have to look at the bigger picture. Has the manager done everything within his power? Let's say we go into the final game of the season and it was like the game at Old Trafford where we controlled the game. We had all of the ball. We should have scored goals. We should have created more clear-cut chances. And we didn't because we lacked efficiency and we got caught on the break twice and we ended up losing and therefore missing out on the Champions League. I don't know how you can pin that solely on the manager because he's set you up to be in that position going into the final game. And he's also set you up in a way that's led to you going out there and dominating a team. The efficiency part, that doesn't come down to him always. Yes, he's got to put the right players in the right positions and recruit well, etc., etc. But if you miss a sitter on the day as a centre forward, you've essentially hung your manager out to dry. So I think you've got to...
And that again comes down to how ruthless we are, doesn't it? Because, of course, it's the results business and we have to be in the Champions League. And if it's down to that, then, of course, there'll be circumstances. But I happen to agree with Chaitanya here, just to come back on your point as to why we lost out on the Champions League. I agree with you, it was injuries. But I'll come back to Edu and Arteta in that January period to not replace any fullbacks or defensive midfielders when we had the chance to do it. I totally understand we don't want to panic buy and just buy anybody. But at the same time, I believe personally there's an opportunity there missed, and that might have been the reason why. So I ask you this, if this happens again, Harry, and we go into the same scenario as last season, where we have missed out on the Champions League due to injuries yet again, do we then just go, we can't sack him because he will get it right, we just finally need a squad that doesn't get injured? Or do we just say, he ain't learned from the last, we're still short, we've got injuries, we all knew this was going to happen, and it's cost us again? Like, what side of the fence are we sitting? Do you know what I mean?
Again, if it's Thomas Partey that was injured and it's Kieran Tierney that was injured, then you look at the manager because these guys have been repeat offenders, if you like. These guys are always bloody injured. If you go into the season relying on them, knowing already what you know, you're an idiot. And therefore you blame the manager. If Gabriel Jesus picks up an injury or Gabby Martinelli picks up an injury or Bukayo Saka picks up an injury, I'm not saying it's totally forgivable that we didn't have the depth to cover them, but I'm more understanding of that, given that there isn't really any previous or form for that. If you know of an issue and you don't deal with it, then I've got a problem. Yeah. That's kind of my thing. But yeah, I mean, I'll always go back to this, right? People always say it was January. Who would you have gone out and got in January that you think would have made the difference? Realistic target. Like,
I hate this question, bro. Do you know why I hate this question? Because I wouldn't have told them to go and get Tomiyasu, but they did, and I think he's good. So I don't really care because I don't get paid that much money to go and scout people and get the people in. I thought that was Edu's job, man. So when it's like there was nobody available, I just can't accept that, mate. I'm sorry, I can't accept that there was nobody available because there's teams that have got players in that January window. There's teams that got players in this summer. Tielemans and Bissouma, I don't know what that would have cost, but it probably would have cost the money we were going to pay on Douglas Luiz plus the money we spent on Vieira. We could have got Bissouma and Tielemans potentially. I don't know that, but we could have. That's our facts are there, and the money was there to get it. So when we have who was there available, there was no one available. I never heard this under Wenger and Emery. I never heard it, but now it's like I don't think they're panic buying. I don't think there's anyone out there. Like, do your job better then. Scout some other areas then. If there's no one available to you in that league, go elsewhere. Go to another country. There will be players. We've seen so many come to the Premier League. Go and find your Rodri. Go and find your
But
Gundogan. Go and
but
find your Fabinho. Do you know what I'm
isn't
saying?
isn't the January? Don't you agree that the January window is different?
It's harder, 100% it's harder. And it always has been, Harry, because people are cup tied. People are happy to sit there till the season. But my point is, I don't know how we can keep all the time saying, I don't think there was anyone in there. And it's like the summer. This isn't the January one. This is the summer. I don't think there was anyone available to go and get and panic buy. And I'm like, we had all summer to go and find someone. There might not have been someone now, but most of these players have already gone. We see Zakaria going to Chelsea, and we see on the last day, players, they've gone and got their players. They might not even wanted him, but they've got someone because they needed someone. With us, it's like, oh, there's no one about. We'll just stick with El Neni. I know he's
Yeah,
injured, but hopefully he'll come back.
but it goes back to that point that you made about hey, we're going to see how ruthless the club are. Like Chelsea are a ruthless football
There
club.
you go.
Chelsea can go and bring in Dennis Zakaria on. They've done it on loan, I think, and they could go 3 months into this loan. Actually, you know what? This doesn't really work for us, and nobody would bat an eyelid. You know, they've just sacked the manager that won the Champions League 18 months ago because they had a bit of a shaky start to the season. They're a football club that operate totally differently, and it breeds success. It has, you know, whatever you say about Roman Abramovich's time at Chelsea, look how many trophies. Look how many trophies they came out of it with. Success. Yeah. But if that only works if your ownership put their money where their mouth is. If you're going to be ruthless and sack a manager and then go and give the next one a shit ton of money to then do it his way, fine. Happy days. But if you're going to go and sack Arteta and then you're going to bring in another manager and say, well, in the last 3 summers, we've spent a shit ton of money and therefore we're not going to back you now. You got to work with what you got. Then it becomes harder to bring somebody in and reinvent the wheel. And that's why that approach, this long-term approach, requires a little bit more patience because you're relying on somebody bringing up a team and developing a group together. You know that if Arteta got sacked at the back end of last season, we'd have got what? We'd have spent probably similar to what we spent this summer. What was that? 150, 160 million there or thereabouts. Is that enough to turn a squad around completely and make it your own? It's not. So whoever would have come in would have been operating with what Mikel Arteta's got or had and trying to just put his own spin on that. But then they'd need time to build it up. If you were going to give him 250, I mean, Chelsea spent nearly 250 million in the summer. That's different. You can turn squads around quicker. And if you can turn squads around quicker, you can be ruthless and make those changes and not have these long, painful periods. But if as a football club, you don't operate like that, then you can't be as ruthless in the way that you make decisions around players, around managers. And that's, for me, where the difference lies. And I'm not knocking Chelsea's approach. You've got the money, do it. It works. It's worked brilliantly for them. Look at Man City. Pep Guardiola comes in. I don't want Joe Hart. He's not my type of goalkeeper. Claudio Bravo, in you come. A few months later, actually, you're not the one. Ruthless. Why is he ruthless? Because he knows that he's got the money to be able to fix that straight away. How much money did they burn through bringing in different fullbacks until they got to the ones he wanted? And they maybe still don't even have the ones he wanted. They're still burning money. Like, it's just different approaches, man. It's
them two are clubs are we can't compare to, unfortunately, because we're not in that sugar daddy mode, are we? And Newcastle will find that out now. Lastly, before we finish up, Harry, because we have got to go, man. I wanted to ask you this, man. It's kind of a 3-part question. It's kind of, what's a good season for Arsenal? What's a poor season for Arsenal? And what's a great season for Arsenal? What do they look like for you? Because everyone's different. They think a good season is just competing. They think a great season is winning the Europa League. They think a poor season is a trophyless season. Some people are different. Some people are more ruthless with it, and some people are more realistic with it. So you're quite a level-headed Arsenal fan, man. So what's your thoughts on good, great, and poor?
Good is Champions League qualification. That's ultimately what the aim is. So if you set your objectives at the start of the season and you meet them, you have to say that It's been a relatively successful campaign. So good for me is Champions League qualification. A great season would be Champions League qualification and the trophy, whether that's the Europa League or an FA Cup or a Carabao Cup, whatever, a trophy. And so in addition to your main objective would be a great season, I think. And a poor season would be not making the Champions League, because ultimately we're setting out to do that this season. And I think we've had enough time now to build a much more capable group. I think we've spent enough money to be closer to that than we have been in previous seasons. We showed that we were closer last season, but we need to go one further now. And I do think the additions we've made this season, this summer, put us in that position. So, yeah, let's move. That's how I define him. I mean, I can see in the chat, like someone said, Harry's mentality is the reason, Dan, why we won't progress as a club. At the end of the day, what I think is a good season, a poor season, a great season, that's my personal opinion. Okay, but I've worked and covered this club long enough and followed this club as a supporter long enough to understand what the dynamic is at Arsenal Football Club right now, and to understand the way they operate, the way they do things. And if you sit there and pretend that we're on City's level, that we're on Chelsea's level in terms of spend, that we're even on Manchester United's level in terms of what they can spend, then you will just be disappointed every week and every season. Because if you set your objectives to something that is totally unachievable, you'll always be disappointed. You shouldn't set them too low, but you should be somewhere in the middle, and you should be realistic. And to constantly sit there and say, if we don't win the league, it's a failure, and all of this stuff, and not ever take into consideration the strength of your opponents, all the other things that can impact football matches and influence football matches, it's just being closed-minded, and I don't get it. I want Arsenal to be top of the league. I want Arsenal to win bloody everything. I really, really do. But would I put it this way? Would you bet your house on Arsenal finishing in the Champions League this season?
No.
Exactly. So then
No,
if you wouldn't bet your house on it, then that means there's a good chance it won't happen. So then why set yourself up to believe that it absolutely will? Obviously you want it to, but the fact that you wouldn't bet your house on it tells you what you think about this current team, this manager, the way the club's operating, and what you think is actually achievable. Does it not?
I think, listen, I understand the difference between being ambitious and unrealistic. I totally get that. I understand that. Arsenal aren't going to win the league this season. Where I'm a little bit more in terms of the ambition is obviously because I think personally that Arsenal should be competing for titles. And when we're not, I'll always question why we're not. And I understand at the same time you have to be realistic with it. What is funny is that the people in the chat that disagree with you are probably the complete opposite people that when I come on your channel disagree with me. Because I get exactly that, but the other way around when I go onto your channel or Tom's channel. So fair play to you, man. Listen, before we wrap up, Harry, because we are going to now, what's your prediction for Arsenal this season? I know you've said what a good season would look like, what a poor season would look like. What do you think will happen, mate?
I think we will qualify for the Champions League one way or another. I don't know if it's going to be via the league route. I don't know if it's going to be via the Europa League route, but I think hopefully we've learned from the lessons of last season. Hopefully, we are slightly on the fortunate side when it comes to injuries and some of the other things that have gone against us over the years. And so, yeah, I think we can do it. I think it's achievable. I think it's right to think that we can do it. I think it's right to want it at this stage, but it's not a given. And that's all my point is. People say in a chat, your arguments are dishonest. Like, what do people think I get out of it? Like, do they think I get it all the time? You're on the payroll. Who? I pay for my season ticket.
I thought Kroenke paid your wages, bro.
And he doesn't even give me a free coffee, mate. When I go there, I got to spend £4 on that piss tasting Lavazza stuff or whatever it's called.
I always wind you and Canton up about it. I was like, how much are you getting paid for this? Your nonsense you're talking, or your delusions. I always say it, man.
No, do you know what happened to me? Do you know what happened to me, genuinely speaking, right? When we went through the Unai Emery period, I don't want to say I fell out of love with Arsenal, because that's not true, and that's probably too dramatic and too harsh. But I felt disconnected with Arsenal. I didn't know what we were doing. I didn't understand the plan. I didn't understand the recruitment. I didn't understand the manager. I didn't understand what he wanted to do. I didn't get it. it was the way the Wenger era ended was uncomfortable for me because of all that he'd done in the past, and it just felt like a shit ending to all of that. And I felt a little bit disconnected from Arsenal, and so when Arteta came in, I think there's been loads of bumps in the road and a lot of things that he's got wrong and a lot of mistakes made and all of that stuff. But I at least go to games feeling optimistic now. I at least go to games and feel like I'm a part of it again. I'm buzzing. I'm up for it. The crowds. I think you can tell that from the crowd. You go to games,
Yeah,
Dan.
no, I've said it. I've
Yeah,
said it as
yeah.
well. Home and away, home and away. There's a definite connect with the crowd, 100%, mate.
Mm.
Which doesn't change the results on the pitch, I might add, but
No, it
definitely
doesn't. Yeah.
you can feel good going back to football again. I agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah, and people say, it's because of the PR around Arteta has been better. Yeah, all right. There's a bit of PR. There's a bit of an element of that. Absolutely, 100%. But that is everywhere. If you think that doesn't go on at other clubs, if you think that doesn't go on in other walks of life and other businesses, etc., then what are you doing with yourself? Like, it's everywhere. So you choose how much of that PR you take in. But genuinely, from my perspective, I feel that connection again. And it's why I defend this manager maybe more than I would have defended Unai Emery. It's why I defend the process more than I would have defended it in the past, because I feel that connection again. And sometimes people outside of the club who don't support the club, they don't get that. They'll just look purely at results because they don't understand that, because they're not there week in, week out in the way that you or I are, or even people that watch on from TV. If you follow the club closely enough, you will get that feeling as well, won't you? And the majority of people feel it right now, which tells you there's something at least to be optimistic about. Whether it turns into anything of substance, whether we get to where we want to be is another matter. But I'm enjoying it at the moment. I'm enjoying watching Arsenal. I'm enjoying covering Arsenal. And I couldn't say that during Unai Emery's era, which is why I've given Arteta a bit more leeway, and why I'm willing to give it till the end of the season. And then we can look at it again, as with anything.
No, I think you've explained your thoughts and opinions on it well, mate. There's some of the stuff you've said that I disagree with, of course. I like kind of football and enjoying it, but at the same time, I need to see results on the pitch to enjoy it first, bro. So obviously, when I leave Old Trafford and people say it was a great atmosphere and it's looked good connect, yeah, they might be right, but we lost 3-1. So I'm still annoyed. Do you know what I mean? So, but I do get what you're saying. I do get it, man. And, listen, you're going to get this in the chat by some people that disagree, mate. I get it on most bloody shows as well. It's just part of it, and that's the way it goes. You know this better than me. Listen, bro, I do want to big yourself up, though. In fact, say thank you for coming on, mate. Absolute legend. Please make sure that you smash a like on this video, subscribe to the channel. I'm trying to get to 5K and I'm about 200 away, I think. So, get us up to 5K, people. That would be amazing. And click on the title, because Harry Simu's channel is, of course, in the title. Chronicles of a Gooner, up to, I don't know, 30 something thousand or something crazy now, man. So that's obviously going well
No,
with your content, bro. So keep
not
going.
there, man. Not on
Oh,
YouTube. Not on YouTube.
something towards that way, though, isn't it? I don't know. I'm always terrible with numbers, but you're smashing your channel, man, as always, and doing bits, mate. And it's great to see. And you should be proud of yourself, man. So, how can people come follow you, man? Chronicles of a Gooner, yeah.
Yep, you can check out the Chronicles of a Gooner podcast. You can find me on BBC Radio London now as well, working with them this season, covering Arsenal games and other games as well. So, yeah, if you ever fancy listening to the football on the radio, check us out over there as well. So, yeah, thank you, man.
No, thank you, bro. And you're always welcome on, man. And I'm sure I'll be over on your channel and we're doing some stuff together soon, man. Take it easy, bro. I'll see you next time. Thanks, everyone in the chat. Big up yourselves, up the Arsenal, and hopefully football will be back soon. Take care, guys.